capital reserve fund to save money for future capital expenditures, including capital projects or capital purchases. And then also the election of the board members. So starting out with the budget, the first graph shows the proposed expenditures, and these are broken down by area, and these areas are, again, spelled out by the state of New York. General support is the sort of district-wide portion of the budget. Things like the superintendent's office, business office, board of ed, maintenance and custodial, central printing and mailing, things like that. Instruction is the lion's share of the budget. That's the instructional classroom portion, including in and out of district placements for special ed and BOCES placements for things like career and tech education and P-Tech that was mentioned during the Meet the Candidates night. Transportation is sort of self-explanatory. That's the cost of transporting pupils. Debt service is shown there. That's the cost of debt service on prior projects and school buses. Interfund transfers is a small portion, and those are funds transferred from the general fund budget to other funds within the school district. And then the last portion is employee benefits. On the next page, it sort of breaks down the revenues. State aid, you can see we're a heavily reliant state aid school district. That's more than half of our revenue budget. Property taxes make up a chunk. Federal aid is a small piece. That does not include the coronavirus relief money. That is budgeted separately. We're required to put that in our grant funds, which is separate from the school district budget. And I'll talk about that as we discuss expenditures. Other revenues are local revenues like rentals, use of property, use of equipment, interest earnings, things like that. And then appropriated fund balance, the sort of pink piece there, that's the amount of fund balance that we use to reduce the tax levy and to balance the budget. So starting out on the first page then, you see the Board of Education budget remains unchanged from the current year, as does the district meeting in the the district meeting budget. That's the district clerk and the annual budget vote cost. Central administration is the superintendent's office, and there's a slight increase there for wages. Business administration is the cost of operating the business office. The increase there is due to wages, about half of that increase. The other half is an increased cost for the BOCES central business office that we participate in. They process our payroll for us. On the next page, audit and treasurer. The district has 3 different audit functions. We have a weekly claims audit. There's a claims auditor that comes in and audits every single check that we issue, and no checks are released before the claims auditor signs off on those. Additionally, then we have an internal auditor that comes in and audits every year. They check our systems of internal controls. And then we have an external auditor that comes in every year and audits our year-end financial statements and the results of the operations. So this area of the budget covers all of those audit functions as well as our treasurer. And there's a slight increase there for wages and contractual costs, the contractual costs being the costs that we pay those audit firms. Under tax collection and purchasing, there's no change. Legal and personnel, we have an increase there because we reassigned some staff from the buildings and grounds portion of clerical staff to human resources full-time, where they were split half-time before. So that increase there is mainly due to that reassignment. Under public information and services, you'll see we have a decrease. And what we did is we previously purchased that service from BOCES, and we hired a part-time public relations person in-house. So there was savings to the district there. Under operations, the main increases there under the operations would be the custodial and maintenance portion of the budget, custodial and utilities. Wages and utilities are the increase in that section. Under maintenance, you'll see a decrease, and this is where when we received our allocation of federal funds, we were not able to budget the federal funds in the general fund budget. We have to record that in the grant fund. So I've reassigned some maintenance salaries because based on limited information that we had for what expenditures we could charge there. It had to be related to addressing the learning gap in students as well as coronavirus relief costs. So maintenance, because of the increased cost of replacing HVAC filters and going to the more expensive filters and the frequency that we're replacing them, I moved maintenance salaries over to the F fund. So that's the decrease there. Under special account items, there was a decrease in the BOCES capital charge. This portion of the budget is where we have to pay, as a component district of Erie, Touche, Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, BOCES, we pay their administrative fee out of here. Every component school district is required to pay our proportionate share of their administrative budget and their capital and rental budgets. Their capital costs went down this year. Every other BOCES program that we have in this budget is based on our desire to buy into that service. So we only pay for the services we're buying into. The two services that we have to buy by law are the BOCES administrative and the capital charges. Under the next section, instructional administration and curriculum development, that is the overall supervision portion of the budget and curriculum development, and the increase there is wages. Under staff development, that's a smaller budget that has to do with teacher in-service and staff development, and the increase there is under the BOCES services line. The next portion, teaching, is the main regular education portion of the budget, and again, the increases there are for wages. We did restore $10,000 on the equipment line for musical instruments. We had reduced it in the prior year budget for budgetary savings from $30,000 down to 20, and we increased it back up to 30 in this budget. There were some reductions in BOCES services for things like elementary science kits. We've gone to using an in-house program and buying the supplies to replenish the kits ourselves. So there was some savings there, but overall, you see there was a slight increase, an increase of about $200,000 on a $14.5 million portion of the budget. Teaching special schools. This is where special education, career and tech education, and P-Tech are included, as well as academic summer school for grades 6 through 12. Summer school has been moved over to the grant fund under the coronavirus and relief funding that we received. That's one of the things that we are mandated to spend the money on, is for summer school. So we moved that entire portion of the budget there. We did restore 2 P-Tech slots for new students. Last year, those were taken out for budgetary savings. That's a 5-year program. It's about $100,000 commitment to send a student there. It's about $20,000 a year for the 5 years. We did not send any students in the new cohort last year, but we did budget for 2 this year. And then we had some increases in the special ed tuition lines. On the next page, under library and audiovisual, that's the increase there is due to wages, slight increase there. Under computer instruction, this is a cost of our classroom computers. The administrative computing is up under that general support portion of the budget earlier. But the savings here, again, I moved the computer tech staff wages over to the federal fund because, again, to address the learning and all the remote learning, those folks have done all the work, the lion's share of the work with making that all sing and getting everybody trained on how to do all the remote instruction. So that I felt was a cost that we could attribute to the coronavirus relief federal funding also. So that's the decrease that you see there. We don't budget anything for an attendance officer. That remained at 0. The school counseling, there's a slight decrease in the school counseling budget, and that's because we moved the cost of the summer school work for the school counselors to the federal fund along with the summer school cost. The school social worker, it's a increase there is due to wages of our social workers. Under the health portion of the budget, that's the school health office portion. And the increase there is due to wage increases and increase in personal protective equipment. On the next page, psychological services. This is a small portion of the budget because most of our psychologists are budgeted in grant funds. So that budget remains the same as the previous year. Under co-curricular activities, these are our clubs and organizations, and mostly advisor fees to oversee and supervise those clubs and organizations for the students. There's no change in that budget line. There is a slight increase in the athletic line, and that is based on projected sports teams. We are budgeting, this budget is projecting for full in-person instruction next year, including our sports teams. And that budget also includes our athletic trainer. Districts were required to have an athletic trainer a few years ago, and we moved from contracting for our service to hiring our own. So that staff person is included there also. Transportation is the cost of transporting our kids to and from school, including our bus garage operations. And the increase there is due to wages. And again, we're projecting our school bus routes based on last year's operation, because this year was not a normal year operation. So a lot of projections there. Under employee benefits, there is an increase there that is due to increases in state teachers' retirement and state employees' retirement rates, as well as health insurance rates. Workers' compensation, we did see savings. We're in a self-funded group for workers' comp, so we pay based on our experience. Under debt service, there is an increase there, and that's due to debt payments on the new capital project kicking in. And the next page, interfund transfers. These are transfers that are charged to the general fund budget, but the money gets transferred to other funds. And the very first one is the cafeteria fund. There's a $5,000 transfer. We are required to, the cafeteria functions in its own fund. It's what's called an enterprise fund. It's supposed to cover its own cost. The meal costs and the revenues we receive from selling the meals, as well as the state and federal reimbursements, are meant to cover the cost of the program. By law, we have to reimburse, the general fund has to reimburse the cafeteria fund for any outstanding meal charges at the end of the year. So that's what that budget transfer is budgeted for. The next is a $90,000 transfer to the federal grant fund, and that is to cover an estimate of the local share of summer special ed programs. By law, the summer special ed program has to operate in the grant fund, the F fund, but the state only reimburses the district about 80% of that program. So by law, we have to, the general fund budget has to make up the remaining 20%. Then we include two transfers to the capital fund. One is the $50,000 transfer for emergency purposes if needed. And we have needed that once or twice in the past since I've been here, but that is not used if it's not needed. The other is $100,000 transfer for capital outlay project. We've started doing those the past couple of years. The district is allowed to do one $100,000 or less project a year and received aid on it. It can only involve work at one building, and it has to be approved and completed within a year, and the form's all filed in order to get the aid. Next year, we're looking at the pool filters here in the middle school as a replacement project. Then behind that are the additional required attachments that the state mandates that we attach. The first is the school report card fiscal accountability supplement. This is the same supplement as the previous year because they had not updated it yet due to the testing and the coronavirus closings. Behind that is the 2021-22 property tax report card, and this again is required for us to report that, and that is filed with the state. And that does show you an estimated tax increase of 1.95%, and that is below the 4.08%, which was our tax cap. So our estimated tax increase is less than half of what we legally could have raised. Behind that is the administrative salary disclosure statements, and then behind that are the school district tax exemption impact reports that are kind of cryptic and difficult to read, but we're required to attach those. And I did label the different towns on them because they come to us blank and you really can't tell what town they're for. But this basically just lists the total amount of property that's exempted by town. Then beyond that, just a quick word about the capital reserve that we're requesting. The district had a mandatory debt reserve for outstanding bond issue on buildings that were sold previously, the Brandt School. When we sold it, there were outstanding bonds. By law, we had to put the proceeds into a reserve to use for debt service, which we have. We're paying that bond off this year, so we'll have to close that reserve fund out. What we'd like to do is transfer any remaining monies over to a capital reserve and use that for any future capital needs that the district would have. Basically, allow the district to pay money up front instead of having to borrow, pay interest, and then pay it on the back end. It's sort of like saving for a car before you go for your car loan. And we are required to have voter approval for that. Are there any questions on the budget? Got to find my spot on the agenda now. Okay. This concludes the budget hearing portion of the meeting. We'll now proceed to the Board of Education special meeting.
Thank you, Dan. So at this time, I have a motion to go into executive session to discuss the employment history of a particular person. No action will be taken during executive session.